Tanking is one of the ugliest, most commonly used tactics for building a team in sports, particularly basketball. Since it only takes one star player to completely change the direction of a franchise, it makes sense why so many NBA teams go down this route. Even though the league has tried to curb tanking in recent years, like when they changed the draft lottery to give the 3 worst teams the exact same odds regardless of their record, it still hasn't stopped teams from doing their best to be as mediocre as possible. And even though a lot of times coaches and players try and save face by saying they're still trying to compete, there are plenty of people who have been on the record saying that the team they were associated with was actively trying to lose games.
I didn't realize till I left that the organization wasn't trying to win. So what do you do in that scenario?
Whether we want to admit it or not, pretty much every team has tanked at some point in the past. When done correctly, it can be a valuable tool to quickly gain assets and retool a competitive team. However, a bad tank job can not only keep a franchise stuck in mediocrity for years on end, but it can permanently ruin a team's culture due to the fact that they don't have any winning habits. Today, we'll be looking at both some of the best and worst tank jobs in NBA history, explain the reasons for each team taking this route, and analyze what went right and wrong in each situation. The Kings were one of, if not the most dysfunctional team in recent NBA history. I know they're competent now, but there was just a good decade plus of them being inept at selecting, developing, and retaining talent that they obtained from being bad. And when you're a tanking team, that's pretty much the exact opposite of what you're looking to do. This rebuild officially started in the 2009 season where they got rid of their best player, Ron Artest, and won just 17 games. They were rewarded with the 4th overall pick in the draft, where they would select the eventual Rookie of the Year, Tyreke Evans. Mind you, this was the same draft class that included guys like Steph Curry, James Harden, DeMar DeRozan, and Brandon Jennings. So the fact that he had the best rookie season out of all of those guys signify that Sacramento might be building something special with Tyreke. Add that to the fact that they were able to get DeMarcus Cousins with the 5th pick in the following draft, it really looked like this team was heading in the right direction. However, Evans shockingly stagnated, as he would never eclipse the 20 points per game average that he reached in his rookie season, and didn't develop into anything more than a solid NBA player at best. Luckily for them, they hit on the very last pick of the draft in 2012, as Isaiah Thomas would emerge as a 20 point per game scorer by his 3rd season, but the front office ended up letting him walk in free agency. Instead, they elected to sign Darren Collison, who was essentially just a Walmart version of Isaiah. They also moved off IT in an effort to develop young guys like Ben McLemore and Nick Stauskas, who were both high lottery picks of theirs that ended up being busts. By the mid-2010s, DeMarcus Cousins was an all-star, but had next to nothing around him. They eventually traded Boogie in 2017 and decided to reset their reset. Things gradually turned around towards the end of the decade as they drafted their eventual franchise cornerstone, De'Aaron Fox. But they still had an all-time fumble in the fact that they selected Marvin Bagley over Luka Doncic back in 2018. After this, they eventually got their act together by getting guys like Sabonis, Malik Monk, and Harrison Barnes through free agency and trades. And last year was definitely exciting when they got the 3 seed, but at the end of the day, this team still isn't really close to being a contender. If you asked Kings fans back in 2009 when this tank first started, if they'd be satisfied with missing the playoffs for 14 straight seasons before becoming a team that's still not likely to win a playoff series anytime soon, I think they would definitely agree with me in viewing this as a failure. When you think of a textbook rebuild, this went about as well as anyone could have asked for. After it was clear that the Paul George and Russell Westbrook tandem was not going to lead to a championship, the Oklahoma City Thunder hit the reset button and traded away both of their franchise cornerstones. In return, they immediately got back their next franchise superstar, as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was the main piece of the PG trade. The tank was supposed to start immediately the next season in 2020, but ironically enough, they somehow got enough quality pieces in return from their big trades and made the playoffs, thanks to a rejuvenated CP3, a young SGA, Dennis Schroeder, and Danilo Gallinari. Despite this surprising success, OKC still knew the task at plan and shipped out everybody good on the roster except for Shai. This led to them immediately becoming one of the worst teams in the league. In the process, they obtained a treasure chest of draft picks. They've had an astounding 15 picks since 2020 and have used them to get guys like Josh Giddey, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. On top of that, they still have 9 first-round picks in the next 3 seasons. And unlike the Suns, their entire core is 25 and under right now. So when you take into account the fact that they only spent 3 seasons outside of the playoffs, have a new franchise cornerstone, are already one of the best teams in the league, and can still make a number of big-time trades to upgrade their roster even further, this is an absolute masterclass in tanking. Depending on the lens being used, you can justify the Magic's core today as a product of a successful tank job, but you have to remember that it took them about a decade to finally do it correctly. After trading Dwight Howard to the Lakers in 2012, they fully embraced the tank, won 20 games, and secured the 3rd overall pick the following year, as they chose Victor Oladipo in the 2013 draft. But this wasn't the all-star Oladipo that you remember. He was fairly underwhelming through his first 3 seasons in Orlando, and the team shipped him off for Serge Ibaka. Along with Oladipo in this trade was the 11th overall pick, which ended up being Domantas Sabonis. So they basically missed out on Sabonis and the prime of Victor Oladipo for 56 games of Serge Ibaka, as he was quickly traded to the Raptors for Terrence Ross. So they pretty much gave up on Oladipo prematurely and wasted an additional lottery pick that turned out to be an all-star in the process. Not a very good start to this project. Aside from that, the team did make some sound moves over the course of the decade while tanking. They drafted Aaron Gordon, acquired Nikola Vucevic in the Dwight Howard trade, got Tobias Harris from the Bucks and then signed him long term, and also traded for Evan Fournier, who gave them a few decent years. But it just seemed like they were incapable of letting talent develop at this time, as the team traded Harris to Detroit for the corpse of Brandon Jennings less than a year after signing him to a 4-year, $64 million deal. They could have had a potential young core of Victor Oladipo, Tobias Harris, and Domantas Sabonis to build around. If that were the case, this team would have probably been 1 or 2 smart moves away from making some noise in the Eastern Conference. But as we all know, the team decided to go in a different direction. And what was the result of that? 2 5-game exits during the first round of the 2019 and 2020 playoffs. Also, they were only above 500 in just one of those seasons, where they won a grand total of 42 games in 2019. So after trading Dwight and hitting a hard reset, the team was horrible for 6 straight seasons, won 2 total playoff games, and the best player during this era was Nikola Vucevic. And Vucevic was a fine player, making a couple all-star appearances, but there was just never a sense of excitement surrounding this team. At least during the down years for teams like the Suns and Thunder, they had exciting players to watch while their teams were dreadful. In this case, they weren't very fun, and they didn't turn out to be very good, which makes this whole period a waste of time for the team. You can say that everything happens for a reason, and that they wouldn't be the young and up-and-coming team they are today without those Vucevic years, but it should not have taken them 10 years to build a team worth watching after the Dwight trade. I know that I said I'd be going over the best and worst tank jobs, but I honestly have no idea how to rank the Suns' mid-2010s effort. It's so hard to rank because it led to them getting some of the best players in their franchise's history, but they also had some inexplicably bad draft picks that could have led to them having a championship by now. After being oddly good in 2014, Phoenix regressed the following year, winning only 39 games in 2015. Oddly enough, this led to them landing Devin Booker with the 13th overall pick. Once he got there though, the tank was on, as the team won 23, 24, 21, and 19 games in the following seasons. This of course resulted in them getting some great draft picks, but they failed to capitalize on most of the opportunities given to them. After hitting the jackpot on Booker, they wasted the 4th overall pick in 2016 on Dragon Bender, and missed out on guys like Sabonis and Jamal Murray. They had the 4th overall pick once again the following year, and wasted it on Josh Jackson over guys like De'Aaron Fox and Bam Adebayo. And in 2018, they had the very first pick, and infamously chose DeAndre Ayton over Luka Doncic. They wasted 3 straight top 5 draft picks, and in spite of that, they were still able to build a contender with their lower end picks like Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, and their acquisition of Chris Paul. This led them all the way to the finals in 2021, but they unfortunately lost in 6 to the Bucks. Today, their team looks much different, as they traded most of their assets for guys like Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. At the end of the day, they've been one of the better teams in the league over the course of the last 3 years or so, and also have major star talent to show for it. Despite that, they've mortgaged every first-round pick for the rest of this decade to get KD and Bradley Beal. If this team doesn't pan out, they could be in a really tricky situation long-term. So due to the many missed opportunities and how they've utilized all of their assets from the tank to go all in, I think this can only be looked at as a success if they win a championship. So I'll have to wait and see what happens with them. The single most effective use of tanking easily goes to the 1997 Spurs. Not only was it the shortest tank possible, as it lasted only 1 season, but it almost immediately led to a championship. Following a very successful stretch in the 90s that included 7 straight playoff appearances, the 1996-97 season was an absolute nightmare for the Spurs. Their franchise cornerstone, David Robinson, was one of the most durable players of his era, as he played in at least 80 games in all but one of his first 7 seasons. But during this cursed year, he dealt with back and foot injuries that led him to appearing in just 6 games in 1997. On top of that, Sean Elliott, who was an all-star and their second leading scorer the season prior, also appeared in just 39 games. Without their 2 best players, the team had pretty much zero chance from the jump. After starting the season at just 3-15, San Antonio fired head coach Bob Hill. They filled the vacancy with general manager Greg Popovich, who would go on to become one of the very best coaches in NBA history. Right away, it was clear that Pop understood the assignment and was ready to head straight to the bottom of the league. Remember that foot injury that I mentioned that David Robinson had? He suffered that at the end of December and was originally scheduled to miss 6 weeks. This means that he was projected to return sometime in early to mid-February. However, after seeing how things were going, the Admiral didn't come back and sat out the entire rest of the season. While the team denies the fact that they actively tanked this year, I feel like the decision to hold him out made it pretty obvious what their motives were. After finishing with a 20-62 record, the Spurs were rewarded with the #1 pick in the draft and landed Tim Duncan. Pairing him alongside Robinson not only led to San Antonio winning the title just 2 years later, but it also led to a dynasty that lasted nearly 20 years thanks to Duncan and Popovich's contributions. So basically, this one-year tank job led to them getting a top 5 coach ever, a top 10 player ever, 5 championships, and 22 straight playoff appearances. Quite easily the best tank job of all time. Next up, we have probably the most iconic tank job in NBA history, the Process 76ers. It all started way back in 2013 when general manager Sam Hinkie was actively looking to trade any player on their roster that was going to help them win games. This led to 3 straight years of 19, 18, and 10 wins to consistently choosing the top 5 of the draft. Their first pick from this tank job was an absolute hit, Mr. Process himself, Joel Embiid, back in 2014. This was the exact prospect that the Sixers were looking for because he was hurt his first 2 years, meaning he couldn't help the team win and get better. However, things kind of went off the rails from this point. After Embiid, they very oddly chose Jahlil Okafor, another center, with the 3rd pick in 2015. This all but assured that they were only going to end up keeping one of these guys long term. Jahlil turned out to be a bust, and they shipped him off to Brooklyn, essentially wasting the pick after just 2 years. They then had the first overall pick in back-to-back years during 2016 and 17, and they somehow struck out on both of these picks. While Ben Simmons did have some good years early on with the team, he routinely folded in the playoffs and was ran out of town after 2021. And then with Markelle Fultz, I don't even really know exactly what happened. It seemed like he was going to be at the very least an exciting, athletic guard in the same vein as Tyrese Maxey today. But I'm pretty sure a weird motorcycle incident or something pretty much broke him as a player right before his rookie year. While they've made a number of big-time trades over the years to remain relevant, they have never been a true contender. And that's because the guys that they were going to lean on completely flopped. Could you imagine if instead of Markelle Fultz, they drafted Jason Tatum back in 2017? They'd probably have a finals trip under their belt at the very least by now. Yes, Joel Embiid has turned out to be a generational talent, but pretty much everyone else they drafted from this era turned out to be a flop. On top of that, the moves they made during these years, like trading for James Harden and Jimmy Butler, also both turned out to be swings and misses. To top it off, they still haven't made a conference finals over 10 years after this whole thing started. So the biggest tank job ever turned out to be unsuccessful, which goes to show that team building is more than just compiling as many assets as possible. It takes a competent and mindful organization to figure out how to make the most of the opportunities that come their way. And that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what you guys remember from these teams in the comments. Also, be sure to give this video a like if you want part 2 going over more tank jobs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.